This is the most skilled individual in the field of wilderness survival in China. She carries no food, no equipment, and not even clothing, surviving alone in the Southeast Asian tropical rainforest for 100 days. During this time, she not only had to face countless dangers and the deadly jungle environment, but also find ways to obtain food. In the end, she even forged her own jungle knife by building a primitive furnace. For those who have watched Tui Tian's videos before, her extreme challenges should come as no surprise. To prepare for this insane adventure, before setting off, she gained weight and underwent a full medical checkup at the hospital, after receiving a visa to the destination country. Tui Tian immediately set off. But on the way, a large fallen tree blocked her path, forcing her to continue her journey on foot. When she arrived at the site, she began taking stock of the items she had brought along: 15 fully charged power banks, 3 small solar panels, a drone for filming, and other recording devices. To be safe, she also carried a satellite phone. "I will use these devices to document my entire 100-day journey," she said. After that, she took off her clothes, placed them in a bag, dug a hole in the ground, and buried them, hoping that after completing the challenge, she would be able to recover them. Then, Tui Tian stripped completely and started venturing deep into the forest. Since she hadn't walked barefoot for a long time, at first she felt quite uncomfortable. For this 100-day challenge, she wasn't sure how long she could actually endure. It was her hope that surviving each day would be counted as a success. In the jungle, filled with sharp thorns, it was very easy for her skin to get scratched. At first, she intended to find something to wear, but then she discovered a strange plant. Upon closer look, she realized its fruit contained a sticky mucus-like substance that could later be used as glue. After collecting some, she continued deeper into the forest, hoping to find a suitable place to spend the night. On the way, she discovered a wild persimmon tree with ripening fruits. Without hesitation, she immediately picked one. However, when she tasted the persimmons, she realized they weren't fully ripe yet. Still, if left for about 10 days to 2 weeks, they would be edible. She quickly stripped some tough tree bark, wove it into a cord, and threaded all the persimmons she had picked onto it, making them easier to carry. Because she had been walking barefoot in the jungle for too long, her body was now covered with scratches. She realized she needed to build a shelter quickly. According to the local villagers, wild boars often appear at night, which made her very uneasy. So, she found a tall, wide tree and decided to sleep on its branches to avoid being attacked. To prevent herself from falling while asleep, she gathered several vines nearby, braided them into a safety rope, and tied it securely to her leg. Evening was approaching, and it was too late to build a proper shelter. Luckily, this tree bore plenty of wild fruits. If she got hungry, she only had to stretch her neck to grab one. And so, she curled up on the branch, preparing to endure her first night in the deep forest. The next morning, Tui Tian woke up with her legs completely stiff. Fortunately, thanks to the safety rope, she hadn't fallen to the ground. It seemed that she had gone the entire night without drinking any water. At first, she thought tree bark might contain some moisture, but when she chewed it, it turned out to be bitter, astringent, and completely useless. Her most urgent task today was to find water and fire. After walking for a while, she discovered many wild kogon grass roots. These roots are rich in carbohydrates. She took a branch, sharpened its tip with a stone, and began digging. Soon, she had harvested a pile of them. After a quick cleaning, she tasted them and was surprised. They had a sweet and sour flavor, with sugar and starch that helped restore her energy. After eating, she continued toward lower ground. Before long, she came across a small stream. This discovery filled her with excitement. She could now focus on building a shelter. She searched for some sharp stones to use as tools. After collecting them, she smashed the stones into small shards with sharp edges. Next, she looked for the fire dragon tree, a species with dry bark that easily catches fire. The bark could also be used as toilet paper. She then gathered some dry branches and twisted strips of tree bark into thin ropes. With everything prepared, she began using the fire drilling method to make fire. But after only a few turns, the rope broke. With no other choice, she switched to spinning the drill directly with her hands. Although she had practiced this technique many times before, the harsh environment made it extremely difficult. After struggling for half an hour, she managed to produce only smoke, not enough heat to ignite a flame. Meanwhile, her palms were starting to blister from the friction. It seemed that today, she had failed again in making fire. When night fell, she gathered a few banana leaves, spread them on the ground, and slept there. At the same time, she reflected on the day's progress. Clearly, her pace was still too slow. In truth, it wasn't hunger that exhausted her, but rather the deep sense of failure. The tasks she thought she could accomplish by the second day had not been completed, so she decided that tomorrow, she would focus on making clothes first. On the third day, she discovered the seeds of a certain plant, whose fine fibers could be used to make clothing. Easier said than done. She tore some tree bark, sat down, and began weaving. With her skillful hands, she quickly intertwined strands of grass and tied them around her waist, forming a kind of camouflage outfit. Although it gave her a sense of security, the dry grass severely restricted her movement. It even poked into her chin, making it extremely uncomfortable. In terms of practicality, this outfit was a complete failure. She had no choice but to make improvements. She removed some of the rough grass and instead secured the plant fibers with strips of rope. After about half an hour, a simple skirt was completed. The technique was impressive, and she felt a sense of pride in her creativity. To make it more aesthetic, she even crafted a small shawl. Once she put it on, it felt much more fitting. With clothes for protection, walking through the jungle would now carry less risk of being cut by sharp plants. By this time, the wild persimmons she had picked earlier had ripened. Unable to wait any longer, she immediately plucked one and took a bite. The sweet and refreshing taste surprised her and filled her with excitement. Clearly, this fruit contained a high amount of sugar, providing her with long-lasting energy. With a string of wild persimmons to carry, she at least had enough food to last 1 to 2 weeks. After replenishing her energy, she returned to her survival tasks. Using the stones she had collected as cutting tools, she decided to try making fire once more. She carved a groove into a log with the stone and began persistently rubbing a wooden spindle against it. This method required great strength and patience, but after a long time, there were still no results. This left her deeply frustrated. Without fire, her survival challenge would fail from the very beginning. Upon re-evaluating the situation, she realized the wooden spindle she had been using was bent, preventing her from applying enough force. To fix this, she bound the spindle to a tree trunk to straighten it. Soon, the fourth day arrived. To recharge her power banks, Tui Tien climbed a tree, hung her small solar panels on the branches to absorb sunlight, and plugged them into the power banks. Days of walking barefoot had made the soles of her feet tougher. Still, today, no matter what, she had to make fire. Thanks to being fixed in place overnight, the fire drill spindle was now straighter. Skipping breakfast, she immediately resumed her task. This time, everything went much smoother. Before long, tiny sparks appeared. She carefully wrapped them in a bundle of dry grass and blew gently. After several tense seconds, flames suddenly flared up. "It's burning! It's burning!" she exclaimed, overwhelmed with excitement, like a child. Having fire meant her survival challenge was already halfway won. Once the flames were steady, she finally had a chance to enjoy breakfast. Surprisingly, it was quite a feast: a few fresh olives, tender pine leaves she had just picked, and some leftover grass roots from yesterday. Although she still didn't have cooked food, with fire in her hands, she could now begin crafting traps for hunting. After eating, she went to the nearby stream to drink water and wash her hands thoroughly to avoid bacteria. To be even more careful, she trimmed and smoothed her nails to maintain better hygiene. After all, even as a girl out in the wild, she still had to pay attention to cleanliness. As she wandered along the stream, she discovered many wildflowers filled with sweet nectar. This could become the perfect snack. Even though she hadn't caught any prey yet, supplementing her body with natural sugar was still very beneficial. When night fell, she considered today a truly productive day. To preserve the precious fire she had finally created, she decided that tomorrow she would craft an ancient fire-preserving tool. On the morning of the 5th day, she woke up and chopped down the core of a young banana tree to make breakfast. She brought it back to camp, roasted it over the fire, and within just 2.5 minutes, a steaming hot meal was ready. The taste was mildly sweet, easy to eat, and completely safe to consume. Afterward, she went searching for a hollow-stemmed plant. Using a stick, she cleared out the inside to make a container for her fire-preserving tool. Next, she found wild aromatic leaves rich in natural oils, which would help sustain the flame. Crushing several flammable plants and mixing them with charcoal, she used her hands to mold the mixture into long sticks and placed them near the fire to dry. Once completed, these sticks would be stored inside the wooden tube for future use, but having fire alone was not enough. Knowing that this area had many forest rats, she decided to set traps. With vines, she created a simple falling rock trap. A vine looped around a branch was used to hold up a large stone. If an animal accidentally stepped into the trap, the stone would instantly fall. After testing the mechanism, she continued building several more traps around the area, effectively turning the place into a dangerous maze for small animals. She had now survived 5 consecutive days in the jungle. However, she still didn't have a truly effective tool to help her build a proper shelter. For this reason, she decided to craft a stone knife. Carefully, she sharpened a rock she had picked up near the stream until it was razor sharp, then searched for a sturdy piece of wood to serve as the handle. Unfortunately, with only a single stone tool at her disposal, chopping wood was exhausting. But then again, survival in the wild was never meant to be easy. Just to cut down a tree as thick as her arm, Thuy Tien had to spend 2. After 2.5 hours, she was completely exhausted, but resting was not an option. She continued carving a groove into the wooden handle to secure the stone blade. After shaping it roughly, she used hot embers to burn the groove wider, constantly blowing to keep the coals burning evenly. Once the hollow was large enough, she inserted the stone blade and hammered it firmly in place. To make it even sturdier, she tied vines tightly around the joint. In just over 10 minutes, a crude but highly practical axe was born. Looking at her creation, she couldn't help but laugh. It looked a bit ugly, but the important thing was that it worked. She immediately tested it on nearby trees and quickly noticed the difference. Chopping wood had become far easier. This was a major breakthrough, marking the beginning of her own Stone Age and her survival journey. Continuing her exploration, she discovered a type of plant called the golden stream. Though she had never tried it before, her adventurous spirit pushed her to take some back to camp and roast it over the fire. When the outer skin turned golden, she tasted a piece. The flavor wasn't very pleasant, but by imagining it as grilled meat skewers, she was able to swallow it. Next, she pulled out some guavas she had gathered a few days earlier. However, they were still not fully ripe and tasted very astringent. Even so, they still gave her a sense of fullness. Not stopping there, she brought out a cluster of wild olives. Compared to the previous foods, these were by far the most delicious, giving her an extra boost of energy. Before night fell, she checked on the fire-preserving sticks she had made earlier. Just by lighting one end, they smoldered slowly, allowing her to easily rekindle a fire whenever needed. This was probably the most valuable tool she had created so far. When darkness came, she curled up once again on the ground to make it through the night. Time passed quickly, and the 7th day of her survival journey had begun. Early in the morning, Thuy Tien went to check the traps she had set the day before. One of them had been triggered, but it seemed no rat had been caught. She guessed that the prey might have been injured but still managed to escape. Believing that the wounded rat couldn't have gone too far, she began searching around, and sure enough, not long after, she found a dead rat lying stiff nearby. Even more surprising, the prey was quite large. She carried it back to camp and roasted it over a big fire, replenishing her protein. After the meal, Thuy Tien decided to find a new campsite since the old one lacked enough sunlight. She aimed for a spot on a hillside with good wind direction. But while moving, she unexpectedly discovered a patch of wild cassava. Cassava roots are rich in starch, just one tuber could replace an entire meal. Without hesitation, she crouched down and began digging. Before long, several large cassava roots were in her hands. However, she didn't pull them all out. Instead, she left some roots in the ground so the plants could continue to grow. That way, she could return later if needed. This forest was truly overflowing with resources. After walking just a few more steps, she came across a fruit tree loaded with unripe fruit. Unfortunately, the fruit wasn't ready to eat, so she simply marked the spot in her memory to come back later. After trekking more than 3 kilometers through dense forest, she finally arrived at a wide, crystal-clear stream. Looking down into the water, she began searching for signs of fish. This place was indeed abundant with resources. The fish in the stream looked bigger than usual. At this moment, Tui Tien completely forgot her original plan of finding a campsite. All she could think about was catching a fish quickly to improve her meal. Unfortunately, the carp in the stream were incredibly quick, making it nearly impossible to catch one with her bare hands. If gentle methods wouldn't work, then she would have to use force. She picked up a branch and struck the water wildly to stun the fish. When one of them started swimming sluggishly, she quickly grabbed it. Finally, she had caught a large fish. The sense of victory from harvesting such protein filled Tui Tien with excitement, but wading in the water and chasing fish left her feet aching. She decided to stop, even though she had only managed to catch one. Looking up at the sky, she realized she had gotten so carried away with hunting that she had completely forgotten. Since building a shelter was no longer possible that day, she had no choice but to spend the night in a mountain cave. She quickly lit a fire, wrapped the fish in leaves, and placed it over the flames. After half an hour, the fragrant roasted fish was ready. Just one bite released such an amazing flavor that she couldn't help but give it a thumbs up in praise. Before long, the whole fish was gone. But Tui Tien didn't waste anything. The bones were roasted over the embers until crispy, turning into a protein-rich snack. Each crunchy bite was far more nutritious than the meat itself. After eating her fill, she sat down to reflect on a day full of achievements. Realizing it was already her 8th day in the forest, she made up her mind to find a proper location to build a stable shelter. Not long after, she discovered yet another treasure, a wild cotton tree. Fluffy seeds had fallen from its fruit, covering the ground like cotton. She immediately collected as much as she could, planning to use it for personal hygiene. This would be extremely useful later on. Once she finished gathering, she continued heading toward the stream. Soon, a flat piece of land appeared nearby. This was the perfect spot to build a long-term shelter. Before starting the foundation, she decided to process the cassava she had dug up. Wild cassava contains toxins, so it must be soaked in water for a long time before it's safe to eat. She got to work right away. The cassava needed to be soaked thoroughly to remove all the toxins, otherwise, eating it could cause serious poisoning. After finishing the preparations, Tui Tien carried her axe up the mountain in search of building materials. She cut down trees of various sizes and tied them together with vines, fastening one end to a large branch and resting the other end against a nearby rock. With the support of 2 large tree trunks, she quickly secured a sturdy frame. Testing it by standing on top, she confirmed its stability. But just as she was about to continue working, hunger pangs hit her hard. She decided to dig up some edible roots to eat. These roots were packed with starch, providing much-needed energy. Once she had gathered enough, she returned. Back at camp, she lit a small fire and roasted the roots she had gathered. The taste wasn't very good, but at least it filled her stomach. The 9th day began. Today's breakfast would be the cassava that had been soaked overnight before being cooked. She dug a pit in the ground, lined it with stones, burned charcoal to create heat, and buried the cassava inside to absorb the warmth. Worried that eating too much might cause poisoning, she decided to roast just 2 small pieces first. While waiting for them to cook, she took the chance to reinforce the axe handle by heating it over the fire, making it stronger. During this time, she also continued to improve her shelter, covering the wooden frame with branches, weaving them tightly with vines, and adding a layer of leaves on top for comfort. Finally, she finished a small elevated bed. From now on, she no longer had to worry about insects crawling on her while she slept. By noon, the cassava was ready. She dug them up, peeled off the skins, and took a bite. The taste was very similar to roasted sweet potatoes, though a little dry. After many days of survival, she realized she hadn't washed her hair once. Being a person who valued cleanliness, she decided to use powdered soil to absorb the excess oil from her hair before rinsing it off in the stream, a natural yet very effective cleaning method. On her way back, she found some wild young leaves. Normally, people know this type can be stir-fried, but under her current conditions, she had no means to cook them. So she could only pick a few and eat them raw. The moment she bit into one, she almost gagged. It tasted extremely unpleasant. Still, since it was edible, she forced herself to swallow, no longer caring about the flavor. As night fell, another day passed. Every evening before sleep, she always felt bored and lonely. The sense of isolation in the wilderness was slowly creeping into her mind. On the morning of the 10th day, wanting a more stable food source, she decided to set a fish trap in the river. Using stones, she redirected the current to guide fish into a shallow pool. This way, catching them would be much easier. She then sealed the gaps with leaves to keep the fish from escaping. Escaping took her 3.5 hours, and by late afternoon she finally finished setting up the trap. Now, all that was left was to wait for the unsuspecting fish to wander into it. By the time she returned to camp, night was already falling. She dug up the roasted cassava she had buried in the morning. This would be her dinner for the night. The next morning, she eagerly went to check the fish trap in the river. To her surprise, she had actually caught a wild perch. Not stopping there, she used a stick to poke into the shallow water and quickly caught a second one. In the end, she harvested a total of 4 large fish. Because she was so hungry, she decided to eat 3 of them that very day, saving just one for later. It was time to cook. She found a type of tree fruit with a slightly salty taste that could be used as a seasoning substitute for salt. After lightly marinating the fish with it, she placed them over the fire, ready to enjoy the rewards of her survival efforts. In just half an hour, the delicious grilled fish was ready. Its taste was beyond words. She squatted beside the fire, eating non-stop. Day 12 began. Since she didn't have any proper containers for storing water and food, she decided to make her own clay pots for the camp. Heading to the riverbank, she searched for suitable clay. The right kind needed to be soft, smooth, and not contain too much sand. After half an hour of searching, she had gathered enough material, a fine white clay that was perfect for pottery. Excited, she dug up a large pile and began processing it right there. She removed excess sand and impurities, then crushed the clay with a stone to increase its stickiness. The process was physically demanding, but also strangely relaxing. Once the clay was ready, she began shaping the pots. In just 2.5 hours, she managed to complete 3 clay pots of different sizes. They looked fairly good from the outside. The next step was to fire them into real pottery. First, she placed the pots near a small fire to dry their surfaces overnight. The following morning, she started building a simple kiln by arranging stones. She built a circle of stones and placed the pots in the middle. Then she lit a fire and kept adding wood throughout the morning and into the afternoon to make sure the temperature stayed high enough. When she finally opened the kiln to check, she was devastated. 2 of the 3 pots had cracked and broken due to uneven heating. Fortunately, one small pot remained intact. She realized that next time she would need to adjust her firing method to avoid the same issue. Still, having even one usable pot was a success. She carried it to the river, filled it with water, and brought it back to camp to boil over the fire. After so many days of struggle, she finally had hot water to drink. To prevent her only surviving pot from cracking under direct heat, she decided to build a proper stove just for it. She sealed clay around stones to create a small fireplace, used branches as supports, and secured everything with a few rocks. Placing the pot on top, boiling water instantly became much more convenient. That evening's dinner was still roasted cassava. She forced herself to eat until full to make it through the night. The next morning, Tui Tien took her clay pot and went around collecting nectar from a flower called the millet blossom. The flowers were rich in nectar, just a light tap was enough to fill her palm. She tasted a little, it was sweet but slightly bitter. Still, it contained plenty of sugar. She patiently spent the entire day gathering nectar, eventually filling the whole pot. Then she used leaves and cotton-like fibers as a filter to remove impurities, leaving behind a usable liquid. At first, she planned to boil it down into sugar, but no matter how long she cooked it, the result wasn't what she expected. Another day passed. The following morning, she ate a bit of palm heart for breakfast before going to check the fish trap. To her delight, she had caught 4 wild crucian carp. What incredible luck! At least she wouldn't have to worry about a lack of protein for a while. At the river, she cleaned out the fish guts, then quickly returned to camp to prepare lunch. She simmered the fish in the pot with nectar, a pinch of salt, and some sour-tasting leaves, turning it into a sweet and sour fish dish. After half an hour, she took the fish out and poured the thick sauce over it. One bite revealed a perfectly balanced sweet and sour flavor that woke up her entire palate. The fish meat was soaked with sauce, making it incredibly delicious. On the 16th day, Thuy Tien discovered a wild plant called Hak Vong Lan. Its rhizomes were soft yet incredibly tough, making them perfect for weaving. She immediately gathered a large bundle to craft herself a new outfit. Next, she lined the insides with palm bark for comfort, then slipped them on. To her delight, the shoes not only looked decent but also provided effective protection for her feet. As for lunch that day, she gathered some flower petals around the area and brought them back to camp. She tossed them directly into the pot to enhance flavor, added a bit of sour greens, and finally dropped fish into the broth. She kept the fire burning strong for over half an hour, and soon, a fragrant fish and flour stew was ready. The dish carried a gentle floral aroma that made it both unique and satisfying. The floral fragrance blended with the tender sweetness of the fish, creating a rather unique flavor. However, the weather quickly turned bad as dark clouds rolled in. What she feared most now was a heavy downpour, since her shelter was still unfinished. After eating her fill, she took the opportunity to make herself a hat to protect her face from scratches while moving through the forest. While exploring nearby, she came across a large number of wild mushrooms. With her experience, she could tell that this particular type was safe to eat. Wasting no time, she picked a whole bag full and started heading back to camp. On the way, she noticed signs of small animals. Remembering how delicious the wild rat she had trapped before was, she immediately set up another snare using the same method. Any rat passing through would have its neck caught instantly. Back at camp, she prepared herself a pot of mushroom soup. The flavor was quite bland, almost tasteless, the kind of dish few would ever think of eating. But in her situation, having something to eat at all was already a blessing. On the 19th day, breakfast was still just the same bland mushroom soup. After eating, she used palm bark to craft a pair of shoulder guards, protecting her arms from scratches as she moved through the forest. Excitedly, she went to check her traps. But upon reaching the riverbank, she froze. The river water had risen and swept away all her fish traps. A deep sense of disappointment flooded her. Fish had been her only reliable source of protein for the long term, and now it was all gone. Everything felt like a cruel joke, a dream spiraling out of control, far beyond her reach. The most urgent task now was to build a roof. The rising water could mean a storm was coming. She quickly began gathering bundles of thatch grass and carried them back to camp. Yet the sky showed no mercy. A light rain had already started to fall. To avoid getting soaked while sleeping, she hastily spread layers of grass over her bed, hoping to crawl underneath for shelter when the rain grew heavier. As darkness fell, the rain still hadn't stopped. The rain showed no signs of stopping, so she could only curl up under her bed, shivering through the night. By the next morning, her campfire had been completely extinguished, and her clothes were soaked. Fortunately, her fire-starting kit remained intact. That alone gave her a spark of hope. She searched around the camp and found a dry bird's nest to use as tinder, quickly managing to light a small fire again. Thanks to this, she could dry her wet clothes. With no other food available, she had to make do with the young shoots she had gathered earlier. She placed them into a pot to boil for a short while. The dish certainly didn't look appetizing. but she forced herself to swallow it. Life at this point was extremely harsh. The most important task for the day was finishing her shelter. She took her axe up the mountain and chopped down a pile of large branches. Returning to camp, she built a frame right above her bed, then layered the roof with thatch grass. It was a time-consuming and exhausting job, but she had no other choice. After working tirelessly all afternoon, the thatched hut was finally complete. From now on, even heavy rain would no longer worry her. By this point, she had survived 22 days deep in the wilderness. Most of her time had been spent searching for food. The next morning, as she went down to the river to collect water, she was surprised to discover that it was crab season. After 2 days of hunger, this was truly great news. She immediately bent down and dug through the streambed, managing to catch 4 small crabs. This meant she had found a reliable new source of protein for the days ahead. However, she had to be extremely careful while preparing them, as their shells carried many parasites. Even after boiling, there was still residue on the surface, so she meticulously cleaned them once more before grilling over hot coals. This method ensured maximum sterilization. When the crabs were ready, she eagerly took a bite. The flavor was familiar, crispy, slightly salty, and incredibly satisfying. A rare delicacy in the wild. It seemed she would need to gather more crabs in the coming days. As night began to fall, that night, she carried a torch down to the river, hoping to catch more crabs. But instead of crabs, she found a school of small fish. The next morning, she decided to gather some vines to weave a fish trap. Along the way, she stumbled upon a bird's nest containing several eggs. Eggs are packed with protein, which meant she had secured another nutritious meal for the evening. She then sat down on the ground and began working on the trap. First, she placed a ring of branches into the soil as a frame, then wrapped the vines around it one by one. The method was simple yet effective. After 2.5 hours of focused effort, the fish trap was complete. She packed earthworms into leaves as bait and placed the trap in a secluded corner of the stream, waiting for fish to swim in on their own. On day 24, she went out to check the traps. Unfortunately, most of them showed no activity. Only one appeared to have been triggered, but no prey had been caught. On her way back, she found wild fruits that looked like sour apples. However, they were toxic and inedible. Instead of wasting them, she decided to repurpose their skins as mosquito repellent. Continuing along the stream, she discovered clusters of wood ear mushrooms growing in the water. They resembled algae but were actually edible. After tasting one, she noted its jelly-like texture. Back at camp, she crushed the toxic fruits she had gathered, soaked them in water until softened, and applied the mixture to her skin. Surprisingly, it worked well to keep mosquitoes away. By day 25, heavy rains returned. Fortunately, with her shelter now complete, she could stay inside without worrying about getting wet. The comfort of staying dry brought a rare smile of satisfaction to her face. That evening, swarms of winged termites gathered around the fire. A few weren't worth noticing, but collected in large numbers, they could provide a rich source of protein. The next morning, she carefully gathered a handful, placed them on a hot stone, and roasted them. To her surprise, they tasted buttery and slightly tangy, almost like a wild delicacy packed with nutrients. From now on, her survival menu had gained another reliable option. Her survival menu had gained yet another dish. After finishing breakfast, she went to check the fish traps. This time, she was in luck. Several small fish had been caught, along with 2 plump crabs. She brought her catch back to camp and grilled them over the fire. In just 2.5 minutes, the meal was ready. The flavor was irresistible, especially the crabs, crispy and golden, cracking satisfyingly with each bite. That evening, she went to the stream and managed to catch a few frogs. In a situation like this, anything with protein was too valuable to pass up. On day 28, she checked her animal traps and was shocked to find that one had caught a massive field rat. With its size, her meal would be much more filling. The extra protein gave her a surge of energy, inspiring her to weave an even larger fish trap to increase her chances of catching more fish. But just collecting enough vines for it took the entire day. The next morning, she continued exploring and discovered a wild tree loaded with ripe fruits. To her surprise, they tasted sweet, much like figs. The tree bore dozens of fruits, enough to keep her fed for days. After breakfast, she got to work weaving the larger fish trap. She believed that the bigger the trap, the more fish she could catch. After more than 5 hours of effort, the trap was finally finished. She carried it to the river and set it underwater. By day 30, she had another idea. To make weaving easier, she crafted a simple spindle from palm wood, which allowed her to roll up the vines neatly for later use. On day 31, she wove a basket to make harvesting wild fruits more convenient. On her way back, she stumbled upon a beehive hanging from a tree branch. Harvesting wild honey is usually a risky challenge, but luckily, these bees were docile. As long as she moved slowly, they wouldn't become aggressive. With careful hands, she managed to collect a large chunk of honeycomb. The taste was heavenly, sweet beyond words. It was, without a doubt, the most precious food she had discovered so far. That day's lunch was a true feast: boiled cassava, fresh wild fruits, and rich golden honey. Life in the wild sometimes felt like paradise. On day 32, after so many days lacking proper nutrition, her vision began to blur. To supplement her diet, she checked the fish traps, but the large one had only caught a few small fish, barely enough for a single meal. The effort hardly matched the result. Still, at least it provided food to keep her going. Refusing to give up, she moved the trap to a new spot. One of the animal traps had also caught a rat. Overall, the day's harvest wasn't too bad, and she returned to camp to enjoy her lunch. The fish were so small that she could chew them whole, bones and all, crispy and satisfying. By day 33, she felt that her period was approaching, so she started thinking about making underwear from cotton fibers. At first, she tried weaving directly on the ground using branches, but it was rough, uncomfortable, and impractical. So instead, she cut down a piece of bamboo, smoothed it with a stone, and used it as a weaving tool. Surprisingly, this method worked quite well. In just 30 minutes, she had woven a small piece of fabric. With steady effort, the shape of a triangular undergarment began to take form. Her craftsmanship was impressive, though she knew it wouldn't be finished in a single day. Later, she returned to the familiar spot to gather more wild fruits, which had become her main source of dessert. On the way back, she came across a poisonous tree. Its very name suggested danger. But instead of fear, it gave her an idea: to craft a spear for self-defense. She sharpened the end of a wooden staff, then charred it over fire to harden the tip. Afterward, she ground it against river stones to refine the point and finally coated it with a layer of toxic sap. Even just having it in camp gave her a stronger sense of safety. On day 34, she took out the vine seeds she had soaked earlier. According to the survival book she once read, these seeds could be eaten safely after soaking, but in reality, she wasn't sure. So, she decided to bring the seeds back to camp, cook them, and give it a try. She tasted one bite, but the flavor was extremely unpleasant, hardly something that could even be called food. Still, trusting what the book had said, she forced herself to eat them all. The result came that evening. After finishing the seeds, she suffered from severe stomach pain. It was obvious she had been food poisoned. She realized then that she must have read from a false or misleading source. The book claimed these seeds would be edible after soaking in water. But in fact, that was completely untrue. All night, she couldn't sleep because of the pain. By the next morning, she had no choice but to end the challenge and return home for treatment. After 34 grueling days of survival, Tui Tien had lost 16 kilograms. If something feels off, let us know in the comments so we can make every story even better. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.